Hello family. Welcome to Morales Stories, your home for gripping African tales. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. Now sit back and enjoy the drama. Dominic Black pressed his forehead against the windowpane, looking out over the sprawling city of Lagos. Below, Gridlock Avenue's traffic glimmered like a river of fire, for many, a harried commute. For Dominic, a testament to everything he'd built. 10 years ago, before Whisper had vaulted him into the billionaire stratosphere, he'd been a young developer squeezing code in a cramped one-room flat in the Surulere district, quipping to himself that he'd die before he left the interior of that coating of plaster and peeling wallpaper. Now he dwelled on the top floor of the Ebony Heights penthouse, a glass fortress suspended above the saltwater breeze. The air was cooler here. Cleaner. Too clean, sometimes. Dominic closed his eyes and let his memory drift back to the days when the only thing keeping him from bankruptcy was a battered laptop and an undying obsession to connect people. In those early months, before even the first beta testers, he'd hired a rotating cast of odd jobs, mostly neighbors dabbling in tech, a cousin or two with a crooked eye for design. But one of the most constant fixtures in those formative nights was Mara. She'd arrived as a shy, soft-spoken maid recommended by his late aunt, Mrs. Black, soon after Dominic's parents had died in that tragic road accident outside Ibadan. Mara was quiet, diligent, and unbelievably patient with his raw, unfiltered ranting every time the code crashed, or the server crashed, or his own motivation crashed. From the earliest lines of JavaScript to the feature rollouts that conquered continents, Mara was there, ironing his shirts for investor pitches, cooking suya-style skewers to fuel his late-night sprints, and listening, always listening. Sometimes she'd hum a gentle tune while she worked, a lullaby in Igbo, softer than any lullaby he'd ever known. When Whisper launched inside Nigeria, barely a ripple, by its 6-month anniversary, it had become the fastest-growing messaging app in West Africa. By year 2, they'd opened offices in Nairobi and Johannesburg. By year 4, they'd secured partnerships with European telecoms. By year 6, Whisper was a household name in 22 countries. And Dominic, God help him, had become the sensation that glossy magazine covers salivated over, the boy genius who turned a local idea into a global phenomenon. His bank account swelled by the day, and so did the entourage of suits, consultants, and PR advisors who told him he needed a more refined image if he wanted to keep climbing. Mara was there when the first check for 10 million naira landed months after their Lagos beta launch. She was there when the 100 million naira Series A closed. She was there when the billion-dollar valuation certificate was signed. Every milestone found her humming softly behind his designer trousers and tattered sneakers. But Dominic's soul had begun to warp under the fluorescent lights of ambition. He forgot the taste of humility. Forgot that he had ever slept on the cot beneath her simple cot-size bed. He forgot that she was the cornerstone that had held his foundation together. All he saw now was growth potential, and humans of a certain station were collateral. The transition began subtly. She noticed it first when he upgraded his office, telling her, "I've hired a concierge service. They'll handle all the minor duties here." Mara stood in the doorway of his pulpit-style office on the 50th floor of Ebony Heights, eyes downcast beneath the brim of her well-worn head wrap. The new steel-gray concierge officer glided past her with a silver tray of espresso shots. "But, I still clean?" she asked, voice trembling as she adjusted the mop standing nearby. Dominic looked up from his desk, his gaze narrowing, a luxury condo's sales pitch flickering on the flat screen behind him. "You don't fit the image anymore," he said, without a hint of guilt. His gaze returned to the spreadsheet he'd been scanning. "You were just a phase." He slid the spreadsheet back over. Her knuckles turned white as she gripped the wooden pole. For a fleeting moment, she glimpsed what he'd become, the man who once whispered, "If anyone touches my code, I kill them," now making $250 million decisions without hesitation. Mara's heart clenched around that jab. Just a phase. But she forced herself not to cry. She hoisted the mop and bucket, whatever pride she'd had still intact, and walked out. Past glass walls where the sun refracted on his trophies, awards and plaques collecting dust. past the concierge officer whose smile dripped with patronizing politeness, and past the buried memory of who he'd once been. That night, Mariner's Bay Road glowed crimson under city lamps. Mara stepped out onto the sidewalk outside Ebony Heights, the mop and bucket rolling away with a wheeze behind her. The cool breeze carried the distant hum of traffic, both a lullaby and a reminder that life continued beyond the glass castles of the elite. She swallowed hard, breathing in the exhaust fumes like she'd never tasted air before. Her uniform had rips now, and her hands smelled of bleach. But something inside her bristled with newfound resolve. She was not broken. Far from it. The ember in her chest, the same ember that had fueled 6 years of self-sacrifice, still glowed. Tonight, it had turned into wildfire. 6 months later, Dominic Black strode down the red carpet at the most exclusive tech gala Lagos had ever seen. The Hilton's Grand Ballroom had been transformed into a silver-tinged techno wonderland, massive holographic screens flashing Whisper's logo, DJs spinning dubstep remixes of Afrobeat rhythms, glasses of champagne fizzing under every spotlight. Photographers jostled for prime angles. Fans craned their necks trying to glimpse the mysterious Lana Vieira, a viral influencer whose name was as synonymous with scandal as it was with couture. He arrived arm-in-arm with Lana. She was a palace of sequins, dark eye makeup smudged with gold glitter, and lips the color of blood. He wore a midnight blue tuxedo with black satin lapels. The black silk bow tie was clipped just so. Dominic Black, tech titan. The posters lining the entrance proclaimed it. But greatness has a price. Mara's absence had become a ghost that haunted him on nights he couldn't sleep. He barely acknowledged it now, though, for on nights like this, the only thing that mattered was his image. Snap. Flash. Snap. The paparazzi's shutters chimed like a digital metronome. Pulsing drums thumped from hidden speakers. And lane after lane of exclusive guests passed through the valet and security checkpoints. This was the pinnacle. Big money meets big spectacle meets big ego. But the moment his polished Oxfords touched the cranberry red carpet, his world shifted. Down near the rear service aisle, a familiar figure bustled past the caterer's trays. A uniform unlike any he'd seen obstructed his peripheral. Mara standing there in a crisp black and white ensemble, her hair pulled back in a simple plait, her eyes cast down. He froze. The music surged like a wave, but his heart thudded in his chest like an alarm. The crowd around him blurred. The photographer's flash caught her in mid-pour, balancing a tray of canapés, her posture a single line of dignity and purpose. Lana hissed through painted lips, "Who?" Her words cut short as she followed his gaze. Her eyes flickered to Mara. A flicker of amusement passed over Lana's face, cold, predatory amusement, like a shark smelling blood in the water. "Isn't that the maid you used to have?" Lana whispered, loud enough for a few guests to crane their necks. Dominic didn't respond. His chest tightened. The name, Mara, weighed on his tongue like an accusation. Back when they'd met, he'd called her his lucky charm. God, how naive he'd been to believe luck came without loyalty. If only he'd known that success would cost him his own humanity. Mara caught his eye. Their gazes locked, hers steady, steeled against embarrassment, his searching, flint-sharp, regret fingering his expression. In that instant, Lana produced her phone. A perfect shot, Dominic arms linked with Lana's haute couture gown. Mara bent over a tray of shrimp rolls. Lana snapped it, then posted on the spot. From maids to millionaires, some of us evolve. Nail polish sparkles #no dirt sticks forever. Within seconds, the post circulated. Retweets, likes, comments, burned. She got schooled. Rich people problems. And indirectly, every follower's jeer felt like a hand spitting on Mara's dignity. Mara swallowed. Heat flushed her cheeks. She kept pouring drinks, forcing herself not to break. When she lowered her gaze and resumed her work, the world around her felt jagged, like shards of broken glass in her chest. 5 years of quiet loyalty, gone. He left her to get stepped on, and now the platform from which he launched was kicking her down again. Dominic hovered nearby for the rest of the evening, half listening to speeches, half drowning in guilty reminders of her. As the gala closed and he accepted congratulations, the chant of Dominic Black, the boy wonder, still echoing, his mind kept returning to that single phrase, "You were just a phase." Underneath the tuxedo's crisp facade, dread drug its fingers through his spine. He felt hollow, naked. The lights that once felt like worship now felt like spotlights illuminating his greatest regret. Later, when the afterparty kicked off in the VIP lounge, Lana draped in another sequined outfit, her laughter a weapon, Dominic slipped out to the balcony. The city's lights twinkled below like a million fireflies. Organ grinders played from inside the lounge, the bass shaking the glass railing. He pulled out his phone. Scrolling through social media, he saw the gala photos, the comments, and, in one viral clip, the moment when he turned away from Mara. Among thousands of viewers, someone had looped it in slow motion, the pain on her quiet face magnified. "Look at her reaction," one comment read. "She thought he'd remember her." His stomach nodded and churned. Some distant part of him wondered, had it been a mistake? Was it too late? Sometime during the night, Mara finished her shift. The event wrapped up, the decorative lights flickered off. She gathered her purse, an old leather satchel that had once belonged to her mother, and filed out through the side entrance. Behind her, the grand ballroom doors sealed shut, trapping those inside in celebration of wealth. In front of her, an empty valet line. It was midnight. As the air cooled, she exhaled, the ache in her chest tempered by determination. She'd been cast aside, used like a talisman, thrown away when her value expired. Maybe he'd forgotten that he'd ever called her Lucky Charm. But the thing about Lucky Charms was that they lost their luck only when the holder forgot how to cherish them. She slipped into the night. And in her heart, a brand new dream flickered. If the world wanted to see a stronger version of Mara, she would give them that, one forged by pressure and fire, not one polished by someone else's whim. Mara woke before dawn, as she always did. Her little apartment in the Aja district was modest. 2 cramped rooms, a kitchenette, and a bathroom that squeaked every time the tap dripped. The tiled floor's pale sheen was stained here and there by the memories of prior tenants. But it was hers, fully hers. No one could evict her at a moment's notice. She slid out of the scratchy cotton sheets into her cleaning uniform, neatly embroidered with Elite Caterers Event Staff in silver thread. Today, she'd be running tables and refilling chafing dishes at the same Hilton Grand Ballroom where she'd last seen Dominic. Today, she'd see him again, the billionaire who'd once championed her, then callously discarded her beneath his luxurious shadow. Today, she'd stand behind a buffet station blocking his line of sight, pouring champagne into crystal flutes, serving caviar canapés, silent, steeled by months of anxiety and longing for redemption. Mara took a deep breath, grabbed her broom and cloth, and made her way to the event hall. Outside, the city stirred. Buses rattled down the street. Minivans honked in protest. She balanced the tray of small pastries on her hip, walking the last block in a daze of nervous anticipation. Would he recognize her? Would he look away again? The questions tangled in her insides like barbed wire. Inside the ballroom, the ambience was electric. 100 neatly dressed servers scurried like synchronized dancers, tables clothed in ivory linens, silver candelabras perched mournfully in the center of each. A sea of well-heeled guests milled about, champagne flutes in hand, waiting for the keynote announcements. The overriding theme, innovation and influence, with speakers ranging from fintech moguls to popular culture tastemakers. All here to bask in Dominic's reflected glow, or so it seemed. Mara positioned herself near the corner where the past hors d'oeuvres circulated. She wore her hair pulled back into a tight braid, her makeup minimal, just enough to smooth out the sleepless nights etched faintly under her eyes. Unlike the other servers who smoothed their crisp tuxedo vests and ironed aprons, Mara's uniform looked worn, almost threadbare in spots. Yet she carried plate after plate, seared scallops on yogurt mousse, mini beef tartars, delicate vegetarian truffles, with both pride and trepidation. The entrance doors opened and the crowd hushed for thunderous applause. Dominic Black stepped in alongside Lana Vieira. Cameras snapped with such ferocity it felt like a hailstorm. Whispers darted through the crowd. "There he is. He's looking good. Who is that woman with him?" Behind Dominic's back, someone breathed lightly. She's that fashion girl with the scandal last week, right? When Dominic's eyes swept across the room, they landed directly on Mara. Time slowed. Mara's pulse drummed like a second heartbeat, but her actions remained deliberate. She exchanged a glance with her coworker, Esther, who gave a small nod. "Keep calm," her eyes said. Lana noticed Mara almost immediately. Her manicured finger pointed discreetly. "That is her," she hissed, voice low yet potent. Dominic turned his head, and for a split second, their eyes locked. But Dominic quickly averted his gaze, resolved not to acknowledge her existence. Once again, she was a forgotten chapter in his epic tale. Lana's lips curved into a cruel smile. She lifted her phone and snapped a picture, Dominic grinning at a celebrity host, while Mara bent to collect empty champagne flutes on a silver platter. The photo captured the entire arc of their relationship, one up, one down, as unbalanced as a seesaw with its pivot shifted. Seconds later, the gala's host climbed the stage. Clapping thundered as she introduced Dominic. He took center stage to deliver his keynote address, an adrenaline-filled monologue about harnessing disruptive tech to empower developing economies. His voice was magnetizing, confident, authoritative, practiced. Yet, under that polished veneer, something rumbled, an internal churn of anxiety. When he pressed his hand to the podium, the engraved silver logo of Whisper glinted, as if to remind him of every deal, every contract, every pixel of code that had given him this moment. Meanwhile, Mara retreated to the back buffet table to refill the guests' plates. She overheard fragments of conversations. Did you see the look on her face? He barely glanced her way. Can you imagine? From rags to riches to nowhere. Even the servers whispered. Her cheeks burned with humiliation, but she pressed on, her broom tip clicking against the marbled floor. A single tray's worth of shrimp skewers tumbled, nearly landing on a guest's designer shoes, and she managed to scoop them back up before the crash. Her hands trembled, her breath quickened, but the world demanded she keep moving, keep serving, keep surviving. When Dominic wrapped up his speech, he descended the stage to thunderous applause. His jacket tails swished behind him as he navigated the crowd. At a corner table, he was met by his board members, toasts raised. They surrounded him like a constellation, ever more, ever higher. Then, as he moved past another serving station to grab a cheese plate, he glimpsed Mara out of the corner of his eye. She was bent low, picking up a fallen napkin from the floor, her posture as humble as the day he'd first hired her. The world seemed to hush around him again. His board members patted his back. Jelly-faced onlookers craned their necks, hoping for a soundbite. Yet Dominic could only see Mara. The irony pierced him. Here he stood, at the summit of his empire, and yet everything felt like quicksand. Lana's phone chimed. Someone had already posted the image she'd taken. Exio's Maid is back, as a caterer. Faced with tears of joy, comments roared like hungry lions. She won't last a minute. Funny how money changes everything. Go back to the kitchen. Dominic watched the volley of messages, feeling each jibe like a blow. He shoved the phone out of his hand, unwilling to look at them further. Still, he felt the cold finger of regret slide along his spine. Mara sensed his stare. Their eyes met as she straightened up, tray balanced on her palm, her eyes flashing with a confidence he'd never given her credit for. She offered him a polite nod, not apologetic, not deferential, just a silent acknowledgement that they were, in that moment, sharing the same space. Dominic's heart clenched. He wanted to apologize. He wanted to call out, "Mara, it was wrong of me." But the world demanded he stay in character, the suave, unshakable so with no room for sentiment. So he looked away, picking up a glass of sparkling white wine. All around them, the gala waltzed on, guests networking, photographers photobombing, servers gliding through the crowd like ghosts. But within Dominic's chest, Molly dried up. He felt empty without realizing it. He raised the wine glass to his lips, and the bubbles tickled his tongue, but there was no sweetness left for him. As the gala wound down, the crowd thinned. The music dimmed to an ambient hum. Scratch that, a storm of internal conflict raged in Dominic's mind. He fled the lounge to the balcony once again, air conditioning fading with each step, replaced by the sultry Lagos heat. Photographers snapped shots of the city skyline, but Dominic's mind circled back to Mara. Why hadn't he reached out when she was still here? Why had he tossed her aside like yesterday's printout? The questions gouged at him, carving hollows in his conscience. Inside, Mara wiped down the last of the buffet tables. The candelabras had been snuffed out. The holographic screens flickered off. She exhaled, stretching her shoulders. The humiliation still lingered, but she'd endured it. In that moment, beneath the glow of floor lamps being turned off one by one, Mara's resolve crystallized. She would no longer be defined by Dominic's careless words. She was more than a phase. She was strong, resilient, and, above all, she would demonstrate her worth on her own terms. Tonight, she'd simply gone through her tasks. Tomorrow she'd rebuild her life and chart a path into a world that demanded more than subservience. And if Dominic chose never to see her again, she would outgrow that too. The caged bird always sings louder once it learns how to fly. With a deep breath, Mara grabbed her satchel and slipped out into the humid night. The world was closing the doors on the gala, but for her, the doors of possibility were just beginning to crack open. Behind her, the Hilton's facade hummed with residual energy. Ahead, the streetlights illuminated Aja's winding roads. Somewhere in that darkness, her future was waiting, untamed, uncharted, and entirely her own. The Dubai skyline rose like a mirage. Glass towers hung suspended over the sea, and the Burj Khalifa stretched its spire into the heavens. Yet none of it mattered in the first weeks after Mara arrived. She'd left Lagos with a one-way ticket in hand and a heavy suitcase stuffed with dreams and fears. Landing at Dubai International Airport, she was swallowed by a wave of heat, so stifling that it clung to her skin like a damp cloth. She found work through a friend of a friend, cleaning villas in Emirates Hills, tidying corridors of five-star hotels, polishing silverware in desert-side resorts. It was a far cry from the grandiose tech galas of Lagos, but it paid more than anything she'd made back home. She lit herself on determination. Every dirham she earned put her another step away from the poverty and shame that had once defined her. One early evening, stunned by the explosion of neon lights reflecting off sheeny marble floors, she entered the opulent halls of the Al Mansour Palace to work as a domestic helper, part of the staff preparing for the annual Emirates Charity Gala. It was a glittering event staged beneath peaked ceilings and crystal chandeliers, featuring live lion dances, Arabic orchestras, and artisans from around the world. The guest list included dignitaries, business magnates, and cultural icons. Among them was Prince Rafik Al Mansour, tall, angular, and as regal as the statues flanking the grand entrance. Mara's first sight of him took her breath. He moved with composed grace, dressed in an ivory kandura embroidered with gold thread, a black agal securing his white gutra. His eyes were dark pools, reflective, discerning, capable of reading an entire room with a single glance. But when his gaze landed on her, it didn't burn with judgment or condescension. It settled, steady, curious in a way she'd never encountered. She was assigned to clean the guest suites, lavish rooms with Persia rugs, gold leaf, patterned wallpaper, bathrooms with bidets and marble bathtubs bigger than her childhood bedroom. It was dizzying. In the mornings before the gala, she polished the silver platters for the hors d'oeuvres. In the afternoons, she dusted the shelves in the library wing where centuries-old manuscripts were shelved. And always, she could feel Rafik's eyes observing her from afar. Sometimes, he'd stand halfway down the hallway, holding a glass of saffron tea, watching her smooth the silk covers on the chaise lounges. After a week of this silent scrutiny, he approached her during a break in the palace's gardens. The rose bushes framed a marble fountain, the water tinkling like laughter. Mara adjusted her headscarf, wiping sweat from her brow. Rafik extended his hand, palm open, not in greeting but offering a rose. It was a white damask rose, petals glimmering in the early sunlight. "You have a gentle touch," he said in English, accent soft and mellifluous. "But your eyes, they carry a story." Mara's pulse throbbed. She stared at the rose first, then at his face, waiting for mockery, waiting to hear words like Maid or worker. But he offered nothing but respect. She recalled how Dominic had once praised her simple hums, how he'd said they soothed him. Rafiq's tone carried that same reverence. "Shukran," she replied, placing the flower gently in her satchel. She bowed her head, and his eyes followed her every movement. In the days leading up to the gala, she noticed Rafiq helping her more than any other royal staff. He'd slip her bottles of water to stave off the desert heat. He'd send word to the chef to make her a simple meal, salted mung beans and dates, enough to fill her stomach without distracting from her work. The palace staff whispered rumors. "Prince Rafiq is captivated by her. He's never shown such interest in a commoner before. Is he proposing? No way." But nobody dared confirm anything. Rafiq was known for his decorum and platform of silencing gossip with dignity rather than scandal. During the charity gala's final performance, a troupe of dervishes spinning beneath a canopy of starlights, Rafiq pulled Mara aside. The courtyards had filled with velvet couches and low lanterns. Attendees danced to haunting oud melodies. Amid the swirl of silk and gold, his voice drifted over the music. "Tell me," he began, "why do you work so hard, day after day, with so little reward? What does your spirit chase when there's so much you could gain by seeking favor from others?" Mara's heart pounded. She set aside the cleaning rags, replaced them with calm resolve. "I work because I have no other choice," she said. "I cannot return to Lagos empty-handed. There I was a maid twice over, once for my country, once for that man. Now I serve to write my own story." She glanced at his kandura, at the family crest embroidered in gold on his chest. "Here, I earn respect with each task done well. There, I earn shame for tasks done well." Rafiq nodded, eyes shining. He lifted his hand and brushed a smudge of dust off her cheek, gentle, as if erasing an invisible mark. "You are more deserving than most of the blessings you receive. But you do not see it yet." After that, they spoke more often. Quiet conversations in the palace garden, where the scent of jasmine drifted through plumes of incense. He confided about his responsibilities, grooming his younger siblings, upholding family legacy, balancing tradition with a rapidly changing world. She shared only fragments of her story, her upbringing in a small village outside Onitsha, how she lost her parents to a truck accident, how she scrimped and saved to attend a local vocational school. She mentioned, reluctantly, a child she once carried, conceived in desperation, with a man who called her Lucky Charm until that luck expired. She rarely named him, always tensing at the memory, as if recalling a wound that refused to heal. Rafiq listened. He never judged. Instead, he folded her story into his own dreams. A foundation for girls in rural communities, a mobile clinic for mothers, scholarships for young women studying technology. "We can build them together," he said, wings of sincerity sweeping behind him. Mara's heart fluttered, hope rising, fragile but real. In the quiet before the dawn of her final day at the palace, Mara sat on the marble fountain's edge, cradling a small black box in her lap, her aunt's amulet inside, a worn cross she'd always clutched for courage. The crescent moon was just a sliver in the sky. Rafiq approached, his silken kandura sweeping softly across the tiles. "Mara," he began, kneeling before her, pulling a slender diamond ring from his pocket. "I am no stranger to history or to the weight of my family name. But tomorrow at sunrise, I will ask you to stand beside me not as a maid, but as my partner, my equal. Will you allow me to love you and our child as my own?" Tears glistened in her eyes, reflecting lamplight. For years, she'd felt invisible. Now, his gaze affirmed her worth. She pressed her palm to his cheek, letting her fingertip trace the line of his jaw. "I never thought I'd see the day I felt worthy again," she whispered. "With you, I believe I can." He slipped the ring onto her finger. It sparkled like a promise. From the palace garden, the faint strains of orchestral strings rose, music that mingled with the call to prayer drifting from a distant minaret. In that moment, they were bound. She, the former maid from Nigeria, he, the prince destined to become emir. Two worlds colliding in a single heartbeat. Yet, a secret lay between them, the child she carried. As she watched him rise, Adjusting his emerald-stitched keffiyeh, her eyes darkened with the weight of unspoken truth. She loved him fiercely, but guilt gnawed at her like a hungry rat. If she told him about Dominic's child, scion of Shisper's founder, would he still accept her? Or would he see in her a hidden betrayal? She took a shaky breath, met his unwavering gaze. "Tomorrow," she said, "I will stand with you. And I will tell you everything." Rafiq smiled, pressing her hand to his chest. The rhythm of his heartbeat echoed hers, steady, sure, hopeful. As dawn broke over Dubai's horizon, mint green and burning pink, Mara's journey pivoted on the edge of revelation. In 6 months, she had gone from a fired maid in Lagos to a princess betrothed to an heir. But the greatest test of her resolve was still to come, the moment when her deepest secret would stand at the crossroads of love and loyalty. The cavernous ballroom of the Dubai International Tech Summit buzzed with anticipation. International delegates milled around, blue badges dangling from their necks, while media crews tested their cameras and reporters swapped last-minute notes. Between massive screens projecting 8K demos of artificial intelligence and virtual reality showcases, the polished marble floors reflected resin-lacquered tables laden with catered appetizers. Lights glimmered from the chandeliers overhead, and the air carried a faint undertone of saffron and sandalwood, signature scents of Dubai's extravagance. At the center of the frenzy stood Dominic Black, draped impeccably in a charcoal velvet suit, crisp white shirt, and a black silk tie imprinted with subtle whisker-shaped patterns as a nod to Whisper's brand aesthetic. Just a few months ago, he'd been one of the featured keynote speakers at a similar event in Lagos. Now, he commanded the stage, a global presence, his mustachioed jaw set like carved granite. His eyes flicked to the large panel reading, "Dominic Black, Building Bridges in Digital Communications." He ran a thumb along the edge of his phone, checking the script that flashed in his palm, notes on growth metrics, market expansion, philanthropic commitments. Lana Vieira hovered beside him, draped in a scarlet couture gown with a plunging neckline. Every inch of her was engineered to catch attention, from her sharp cheekbones to the silk fabric that glittered under the stage lights. Her hair curled in lush stage-like waves, and her makeup was high-definition perfect. Earlier that morning, she'd posted on social media, "Ready to slay at #DIT Summit, catch me and at Dom Black tonight. Fire crown. Within minutes, thousands of likes and retweets swelled like applause, catapulting their combined names to trending topics across 3 continents. Dominic adjusted the lapel mic pinned to his jacket. He inhaled deeply, the bass hum of the crowd vibrating through the stage. Media outlets stood in a semicircle, phones at the ready. It was time to project his vision, Whisper's upcoming integration with satellite communications to bring high-speed messaging to rural villages, where internet penetration was still in its infancy. It was a good story, he'd rehearsed it to perfection. But that morning, beneath his veneer of confidence, a tremor lingered, the vivid memory of Princess Mara Mansour, hand in hand with Prince Rafiq, stepping into Lagos's grandest tech gala only weeks ago. The doors to the ballroom parted, and a hush swept over the audience. All heads swiveled toward the entrance. For a heartbeat, Dominic froze mid-sentence in rehearsal. He expected politicians, business titans, maybe even a celebrity cameo. Instead, reality framed a different sight. Mara walked in, regal, serene, and visibly pregnant, her growing belly cradled beneath a flowing emerald gown that glimmered like the desert oasis at sunrise. Beside her strode Prince Rafiq, tall as a cedar, in a tailored white dikla accented by an intricately embroidered bisht. Together, they moved with a slow, purposeful grace, their silhouettes cut sharp by the bright entry lights. A silence thicker than steel engulfed the room before the flashbulbs erupted like fireworks. Lana gasped, clutching Dominic's elbow so hard her nails painted tiny crescent moons across his suit cuff. "Is that?" she whispered. Dominic barely registered the words. It was as though time slowed in molten glass. Across the ocean of faces, he saw her, the same soft-spoken maid he'd discarded, now a princess who commanded every gaze. Cameras pointed at her. Journalists craned their necks, murmuring, "Princess Mara Mansour, XO's maid turned royalty, is she pregnant?" Screens flickered, capturing the moment for live feeds around the globe. He swallowed, panic gathering like piranhas in his mouth. He'd planned this summit as the crowning achievement for Whisper's APAC and Middle East rollout. Now, all eyes were on the woman he once despised. How could he step up to that podium? How could he proclaim his vision for digital bridging when his personal narrative lay splattered across every social platform as the man who ridiculed his maid? Now she's a princess? Rafik and Mara moved through the crowd. People parted like sand before a mirage as attendants bent low to let the royal duo pass. Dominic's board chairman, a stern gentleman in his 50s with graying temples, elbowed his way through flank guards to stand next to Dominic. His eyes were wide with disbelief. "Is that?" he began, but Dominic held up a hand, shushing him like a child. Lana strode forward, adjusting the train of her gown, plastering a dazzling smile on her lips. But her eyes flicked with suspicion toward Mara. Dominic took a step forward himself, adapting a neutral expression. Neutral, at least, compared to the turmoil in his chest. "Ladies and gentlemen," the event moderator's voice boomed through the sound system. "Please welcome Prince Rafik Al-Mansour and his wife, Princess Mara Al-Mansour." The MC's words reverberated across the room. Applause and cheers filled the air as cameras clicked, capturing the next sequence of events. Mara's gaze slid to Dominic, her eyes calm but steely, as if measuring every inch of his soul. He felt his breath catch. She approached the podium with Rafik, who wrapped an arm around her waist in a gesture of protective pride. The space between Mara and Dominic crackled like static electricity. Their shared history, her unwavering loyalty, his merciless dismissal, simmered in that charged silence. Mara reached into her clutch and extracted a folder emblazoned with the Diamond Rise Foundation logo, a stylized diamond forged from fiery shards. She stepped onto the podium, smoothing the fabric of her gown. "Good evening," she began in a soft, measured tone. Her accented English was impeccable, the crisp consonants softened by lilting curves. "My husband and I appreciate the opportunity to join this summit." Dominic cleared his throat, his voice dry as a desert. "Princess Mara. Prince Rafik." He forced a polite nod, his heart galloping. She acknowledged him with a barely perceptible nod. His mind reeled at how she'd transformed, her posture straight as a spine, her presence magnetic. The memory of her standing humbly behind a buffet table felt worlds away. Mara continued, "Tonight I stand before you not just as a royal, but as a woman who has walked both sides of life's spectrum, from dust to diamonds." A beat of silence. Her words echoed. "6 years ago, I was a maid in Lagos. Tomorrow, I will be a princess and mother. Tonight, I present to you the Diamond Rise Foundation, a platform to uplift women from marginalized backgrounds through education, vocational training, and microfinancing." Applause crashed. Laptops snapped open, journalists keyed in their notes, and the event's official hashtag trended on social media within minutes. #DiamondRise. The camera panned to Dominic, capturing his startled expression. Within minutes, international news tickers displayed, ex-CEOs made returns as princess, Diamond Rise Foundation debuts in Dubai. Beneath those headlines, smaller subtext read, "Dominic Black's past comes full circle." Even Lana's expression had shifted, from smug triumph to forced cheer, as though she'd realized her game had unexpectedly backfired. Mara stepped down from the podium, her hands still resting on her belly, protective and empowered. She turned to Dominic, her eyes steady. "Dominic," she said softly, "I admired you once. You built an empire from an idea. But you regarded me as dispensable, a mere accessory to your success." Her words cut the air like a blade. He winced as though struck. She continued, "Now I have my own empire, one built from the ashes of betrayal, from the sweat of perseverance. I leave you with this. I do not need your help, nor do I seek your approval. My worth was never defined by what you gave me, but by what I became." She and Rafik turned, leaving Dominic scarred in the glare of flashbulbs. As they exited, the sound of the crowd's thunderous applause followed them, leaving his speech forgotten in the echo. Alone on the podium, Dominic's eyes scanned the empty lectern where his notes lay abandoned. The scripted applause vanished, replaced by a chorus of digital notifications chiming in his breast pocket. Glancing down, he found hundreds of unread messages, tweets demanding an apology, forum threads dissecting his behavior, memes labeling him a heartless CEO. He felt as though he'd been stripped bare before the world, his reputation crumbling under the weight of his own indifference. At that moment, wide-eyed with disbelief, Dominic realized the power dynamics had flipped. He had once believed his net worth measured his significance. Now, he grappled with a truth more merciless. Dignity, once lost, demanded far more than superficial wealth to retrieve. Lana sidled up behind him, her diamond earrings tinkling like captive bells. "What happened?" she whispered, panic sneaking into her tone. "We practiced for months, our image, our speeches. How could she upstage us like that?" Dominic straightened his spine, steel turning to resolve in his eyes. "She did not upstage us," he murmured, voice low. "She eclipsed us." He let the words sink in, forging a silent vow that before the night ended he'd find a way to rectify his missteps. But as the crowds filtered out, cheering about the inspiring princess, he knew that redemption wouldn't be as easy as a public statement or a charity donation. It would require depth he'd long forgotten. Somewhere in the corridors beyond the stage doors, Mara and Rafik ascended the private elevator. She pressed her palm to her belly, feeling the life growing there. In those tiny movements, she felt the unstoppable surge of her destiny, from discarded maid to princess, poised to spark a revolution. And as she clung to Rafik's arm, shielded from the storm of flashbulbs, she realized that her return had not just been a personal triumph, it was the first tremor of a world shifting its axis. For once, the mirrors weren't reflecting someone else's grandeur. They reflected her. Dominic sat alone in his suite at the Burj Al Arab, the city's glittering skyline stretching beyond floor-to-ceiling windows like a field of stars. Once, he had reveled in such vistas, proofs of his triumph. Tonight, they mocked him. The suite's gold-accented furniture and velvet carpets felt suffocating, as though he were imprisoned in luxury. He stared down at his reflection in the window. Unshakable posture, impeccably tailored charcoal suit, but hollow eyes. His phone vibrated incessantly, alerts from the media, shareholders demanding explanations, messages from friends unsure whether to console or distance themselves. Yet none of that noise compared to the memory of Mara's words. "Does it matter? You never asked who I was, only what I wasn't." His stomach knotted, and he poured himself a double scotch, on the rocks, but the ice clinked ineffectually, failing to dull the fire in his veins. He stared at the amber liquid, contemplating the man he had become, a CEO who had rocketed to fame, leaving shards of broken trust in his wake. He thought of the months when he dismissed Mara without a second thought, exchanging her loyal service for a concierge with a polished smile. He thought of the humiliation gala, the viral image, and the moment she stormed onto the stage at the Dubai summit as Princess Mar al-Mansour. His triumph had turned to ash. He rose and paced, every step echoing in the plush suite. He muttered under his breath, "I need to fix this. I need to." His reflection on the glass dissolved into the city lights as someone knocked on the door. Dominic straightened his tie and opened it to find Rafik standing there, white kandura immaculate, bisht folded precisely over his shoulders. Rafik's presence was commanding, yet his expression was measured. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, closing the door with a soft click that reverberated through the room. "Good evening, Dominic," Rafik said. "I trust you remember me." His voice was calm, the desert wind's steadiness incarnate. "I need to talk to you." Dominic closed the door behind him. "Prince Rafik," he replied, his tone curt. "To what do I owe this visit?" Rafik surveyed the room. Sumptuous furnishings, a half-empty Scotch glass, and the skyline glowing with the promise of tomorrow. "I'd like to discuss your role in tonight's fiasco," Rafik said. "Before the world was told a story of a callous CEO and a fallen maid, I saw a man who built something extraordinary from nothing. As I watched you falter under humiliation, I wondered, who are you, Dominic Black?" Dominic's mouth twisted. "I'm a man who runs a global enterprise," he muttered. "I'm recovering from an embarrassing moment that has nothing to do with you." Rafiq's expression didn't shift. It has everything to do with me, he said. And with Mara. He folded his bish's edge. Tonight, you offered to help her, did you not? When she asked if the child was hers, you whispered, "Is it mine?" Rafiq paused, letting each word sink into the plush carpets. You offered support, desperate to control the narrative once more. You offered a lifeline. But I said what needed to be said. She doesn't need you. Dominic felt his throat tighten, heat flooding his cheeks. It's not that simple, he mumbled. She was my employee. Rafiq exhaled, careful. She was something more. Someone you relied on when she had nothing to offer but loyalty. And now, she's worth more than you can imagine. He took a step closer. If all you care about is narrative control, then you will never understand her, or me. Sometimes, power is not what you wield, but what you relinquish. Dominic's jaw clenched. So you lecture me? Our royalty. I'm nothing but a businessman. You can't just. Rafiq interrupted. I can. He held Dominic's gaze unflinchingly. Because I have nothing to gain from this meeting. Her dignity, however, is precious. And I will protect it. If you truly want to help, start by understanding that she stands on her own. Dominic looked away, pacing a small circle. I never thought she'd turn my world upside down. Rafiq smiled faintly, almost sadly. For someone who once called her a phase, you sure thought about her enough tonight. He crossed his arms. If your apology is genuine, tell me. And then step aside. Dominic stopped pacing. His knuckles whitened against the wall. A silence thick as midnight passed. Finally he sighed. All right, he said, voice low. He caught himself but knew he couldn't hide anymore. I was arrogant. I forgot the values that got me here. I dismissed you without looking at who you were. I thought I was too important to remember your name. And for that I am truly sorry. He glanced at Rafiq, uncertain how to proceed. If you'll allow me, I'd like to support her foundation. I have resources, investors, media reach, philanthropic networks. If it means anything, I want to donate and help her cause. Rafiq's expression remained steady as stone. He studied Dominic. Your sincerity will show when your actions match your words. He crossed the room, lifted a portrait from the console table, a portrait of Mara and Rafiq at their engagement ceremony. He handed it to Dominic. Keep this. His fingers brushed Dominic's palm, leaving a faint warmth. Let it remind you that sometimes, people transcend your expectations. Let it remind you to see them for who they are, not what you need them to be. Dominic nodded, swallowing. I will. I swear I'll do better. Rafiq dipped his head and left the suite without another word, as regal and silent as the moon above Dubai. The next morning, the world awakened to a different narrative. International headlines declared, Dominic Black apologizes, pledges support for Diamond Rise Foundation, Whisper CO donates $5 million to empower women. Social media erupted with analysis. Is this genuine or PR spin? Moments like these define a man's character. She said she doesn't need your help. Why do you still offer it? The commentary raged, but Mara refused to look at her phone that day. She and Rafiq were in their private villa on the outskirts of the city, secluded, tranquil, surrounded by a private rose garden. They sat together under a date palm, a low wooden table between them dotted with fruit, tea, and figs. Mara cradled her belly as though drawing strength from the life within. He apologized, she said quietly. He said he'd support my foundation. Rafiq nodded. I saw it. But the bigger question is, do you accept? Will you allow him to be part of your journey, or do you guard your legacy as something he cannot influence? Mara pressed her lips together, pondering. She traced the hem of her emerald gown. The sun cast her shadow over the garden's pebbled walkway. In the distance, a falcon soared, a symbol of vision, power, and freedom. She met Rafiq's steady gaze. He hurt me deeply, she said. He thought I was unworthy. I almost never recovered from that. I had to leave everything behind so I could find myself again. Rafiq reached across the table and took her hand. He's offered his resources because he's realized his error. That is growth. But the purpose of your foundation isn't to redeem Dominic Black. It's to uplift others who have been cast aside. Mara removed her hand from his, turning her palm upward. If I accept his help, it might be seen as validation of him, an erasure of the pain he caused me. Yet, if I refuse, I turn down a chance to help hundreds of women. She looked down at the photograph of them together, its edges slightly curling. What do I choose? Rafik leaned forward, voice soft but firm. You choose what aligns with your values. If you feel that collaborating with him compromises your integrity, do not do it. But if you see his support as a tool to further your mission, then do it. Remember, diamonds are formed under pressure, but they only shine when they embrace the light. Don't let past hurt keep you from forging a brighter future. Mara closed her eyes, letting his words settle. I do not forgive him blindly, she said, eyes still closed. But I will use his contribution to build the foundation my community needs. I will not let him define my worth anymore. If he stands by that apology, then he stands by my mission. Rafik smiled, brushing a stray curl from her forehead. Then let us begin. At that moment, the desert breeze carried a whisper of promise. Two hearts intertwined. One, a prince determined to lead with compassion. The other, a princess reborn from ashes, now forging her destiny on her own terms. In that garden surrounded by gold dust and rose vines, the power flip was complete. No longer would Mara be just a maid. She was a queen in every sense, sovereign, unstoppable, and guided by a purpose that no amount of money could buy. A soft drizzle fell over the Lagos city skyline as Mara stepped onto the stage at the grand auditorium of the Civic Center. Though the raindrops tapped a gentle rhythm against the glass ceiling, inside the hall, anticipation buzzed with electric intensity. It had been 3 months since she and Rafik announced the Diamond Rise Foundation's launch. In that time, the foundation had raised over $2 million, seed money directed toward scholarships for women in rural communities, microloans for single mothers starting small businesses, and vocational training centers for girls aged 13 to 15. Each success story circulated on social media, generating waves of excitement. Tonight was the culmination, the first annual Diamond Rise Gala, unveiling the initiative's long-term plans and celebrating the women who triumphed against despair. Mara stood backstage, hands clasped around a bouquet of white daisies, a gift from Rafik. She adjusted her sapphire blue evening gown, its fabric cascading like a waterfall down her slender frame. The stage lights rendered her as a figure carved from moonlight and determination. Behind her, volunteers rushed to finalize table arrangements, photographers rehearsed angles, and board members nervously pinned boutonnieres onto their tuxedos. Yet Mara stood unmoved, focused on the horizon. The photographs of her pre-prince life flashed through her mind, pouring water into glasses at Ebony Heights, scrubbing tiles with tears on her cheeks. She pressed her palm to her belly, feeling the baby's flutter, her legacy half-formed, yet already powerful. Rafik stepped beside her, donning a midnight blue sherwani with intricate gold embroidery. His presence beside her was a silent vow of solidarity. "You're ready?" he asked, voice low, carrying the warmth of sunrise. Mara nodded, her pulse steady as the desert sands. "Let's build this legacy." They walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. The audience rose, a mixture of philanthropists, local dignitaries, young women who'd been scholars under the foundation, and the press. As she took her place behind the podium, the dais gave way to silence, punctuated only by the soft hum of projectors. A large screen behind her displayed the Diamond Rise Foundation insignia, a diamond composed of fractured shards that coalesced into a shining gem. Mara cleared her throat, voice poised. "Good evening, distinguished guests, supporters, and dreamers," she began. 3 years ago, I was an anonymous maid in Lagos. I served tables at tech galas and tidied corridors in Dubai. It never occurred to me that someday I would stand before you, not as a servant, but as a leader with a platform to change lives. Tonight, we celebrate not just our achievements but the countless women still waiting for their chance to rise. Applause rumbled through the auditorium. Photographers clicked furiously, capturing her every nuance. She scanned the crowd until her eyes settled on Dominic Black, seated 2 rows back, wearing a charcoal tux with a diamond rise lapel pin. His eyes were earnest, shadowed by remorse but brimming with hope. Next to him, Lana Vieira wore a subtle smile, her flamboyant persona muted for tonight's event. Other board members of Whisper sat nearby, unfamiliar faces to Mara but potential allies for her cause. Mara took a breath, letting her gaze shift to the women seated in the front row. Aya, a 17-year-old coder from Kano who had designed her own education app. Busola, a single mother who used her microloan to start a small catering service. And Fadila, a quiet textile artisan from Sokoto whose village now produced sustainable fabrics sold internationally. Each woman held the stage's edge, radiant in gowns they'd never dreamt they could afford. This was the jewel in Mara's crown, the real diamonds in her foundation, forged by adversity and brilliance. As we build vocational centers, she continued, we also break down barriers, poverty, gender bias, lack of opportunity. Each woman here reminds us that true diamonds are formed under pressure. Our foundation's purpose is to ensure no woman is discarded as just a phase. Every woman is a gem, waiting to be discovered, polished, and celebrated. When she descended from the podium, the live orchestra struck up an uplifting score, a fusion of Afrobeat rhythms and classic strings. Guests rose to their feet, cheering. Mara allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. This night wasn't about her pain, but about a collective vision. She swept a bow to the audience, then made her way to the reception area where hors d'oeuvres were served. A server offered her a flute of champagne. She took a sip, bubbles fizzed across her tongue, and felt Rafiq's arms slip around her waist. He looked at her proudly. "They love you," he whispered. "I love them too," she whispered back, gazing at the guests stepping forward to greet her. She saw Dominic approaching from across the room. His posture was upright, gaze sincere. As he neared, he reached out and said, "Mara, I want to apologize again." His voice carried a tremor, as though each word cost him something precious. She paused, setting her glass down. The memory of why she'd left him returned, the careless words, the final rejection at her lowest point. But she had grown. She studied his face, lines of regret softened into humility. "Dominic," she said, her voice calm, "I accept your apology. But we both know it wasn't just words that healed me. It was action." He nodded, eyes glistening. "I know. That's why Whisper will match every donation raised tonight. I've also committed to sponsoring 5 new vocational schools in rural areas next year. I want to make amends through real impact, not just press releases." Mara's lips curved. "Thank you. That means more than you know." She paused. "But remember, your worth is not defined by repairing my life. It's about honoring the dignity you took for granted. Make sure Whisper's commitment extends beyond numbers. Let it encompass respect and opportunity." He reached out and lightly touched her hand. "I promise." She turned, scanning the room. Cameras swiveled toward them. 2 figures from different worlds, now bound by a shared mission. The lights dimmed slightly as a young singer took the stage, delivering a soulful rendition of Rise Up. Guests rose to join hands, forming a circle around Mara and Rafiq. The music swelled. In her heart, Mara felt an overwhelming current of fulfillment coursing through her veins. This was the moment she had built toward, a kingdom not made of jewels and gold, but of empowerment, community, and hope. Months passed. The Diamond Rise Foundation installed its first vocational center in a dusty village outside Kano, where young girls learned coding and digital literacy. Another center opened in a coastal town, teaching sustainable aquaculture to widows. Scholarships were funneled to young women who dreamed of becoming doctors, engineers, and poets. Each success story was a light that flickered and then burned bright. Mara's child was born at a Dubai hospital under a canopy of white orchids. Prince Rafiq held the infant's tiny hand, his smile broad enough to light the night. Mara stood by, tears rolling down her dark cheeks as she watched her daughter take her first breath. The nurse placed the newborn in her arms and she whispered, "Welcome to the world, my little diamond." Meanwhile, Dominic's company faced challenges, A market correction impacted tech investments, and a brief security breach tested Whisper's resilience. But through it all, he remained grounded, thanks to the lessons he'd learned from Mara. He visited the vocational centers in rural Nigeria, personally mentoring the girls and ensuring Whisper's network infrastructure supported remote learning modules. He gave keynote speeches focusing on corporate responsibility rather than market domination. Every trip reminded him of the brotherhood they once shared, back when Mara had joined his ragtag team in Surulere, listening to him rant after a server crash. One evening in December, Dominic received a small package at his high-rise penthouse, a handcrafted leather journal engraved with the Diamond Rise logo. It contained a letter from Mara. "Dear Dominic, thank you for believing in change, yours and mine. I gave birth to a daughter who carries two legacies, one of hardship and one of hope. You helped build the second. When I was cast aside, I thought my story ended. Instead, it became a beginning. May this journal remind you that the true measure of success is not what you own, but who you uplift. Mara al-Mansour." Dominic closed his eyes, clutching the letter to his chest. A warmth spread through him, contrasting the cold luxury of his penthouse. He opened the journal's first page, where Mara had penned in her own handwriting, "Diamonds only shine when they embrace the light." He exhaled, letting the words sink into every fiber of his being. Outside, the Lagos skyline twinkled like a million hopes suspended in air. He stood at the window as the city below hummed in harmony, music that narrated stories of triumph, loss, resilience, and redemption. In that moment, he realized the shift in power was not about trappings of royalty or the glint of a diamond ring. It was about a throne built from ashes, one he was fortunate enough to witness being crowned. As midnight neared, he closed the journal gently and whispered a silent prayer. For Mara, for their daughter, and for the countless women whose diamonds were still forming under pressure. In the hush before dawn, Dominic rose to his feet and placed the letter on his desk with care, a testament to the one he once deemed a phase, now the woman the entire world bowed to. The end. Love the story? Smash that like button, hit subscribe, and become part of the Morales Stories family. Your support helps us bring more powerful African tales to life. Thanks for watching. We can't wait to share the next one with you. See you soon.